One of the special things about Chinese medicine, which can feel like a burden or it can feel like an inspiration, is the kind of message taught in the Neijing, Yellow Emperor's Classic, and also embodied by doctors such as Sun Tzu Miao, that a doctor is a cultivated person. And when I say cultivated, I don't mean they go to the opera, although they might. I mean a self-cultivated person. And the power that has, the healing power that has.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Qiological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. I hear patients say some pretty interesting things in clinic. I suspect that you do as well. I can always tell when something significant is said. There's a kind of a shimmer in the room, and I feel the impact of it smack dab in the middle of my chest. The feeling is not unlike that of a well-placed and potent acupuncture needle. There's a rippling stillness that echoes in the room, along with a comfortable pause in the conversation. Whatever it was that the patient just said, I write it down in the clinic notes. More often than not, for me, because while it is my patient who is the one that had the experience, I too feel the truth of it. It happened again just the other day. In inquiring as to how a patient was doing, she replied, "My curiosity is steering more than my anxiety." Did you get that? What does it do to you when you hear those words, "My creativity is steering more than my anxiety"? It's a subtle shift. It's not that the anxiety is gone. It's not that life is perfect, but her internal ecosystem, it spins on a different axis. Now, I don't know what creativity means for her. I don't know how it actually feels for her, or what kind of choices get her attention when her creativity has the wheel, or if the choices are different from what her anxiety might have chosen. But I do know this. She was happier. She was leaning more into a sense of generative possibility. Life was less of a problem to fix, and she seemed to be playfully less attached to results. It raises a question for me. What if I was leaning more on creativity than anxiety, or curiosity, or playfulness, or the liminal potential of uncertainty? It makes me wonder about the other patients I have who have anxiety and what other latent resources they might have. What if in clinic I worked less on reducing their anxiety and more on boosting up the joy in the heart, the meaning-making capacity of the spleen, or maybe the vitality of the embodied pore in the lung, or the dark, watery mystery of the kidneys, or, yes, the effusive, generative creativity of the wood in the liver. Often enough, as in nature, maybe we don't need to get rid of something troublesome. We need simply to bring in something else that is more vital and generative. The system will naturally become more coherently invigorated and then lean on that. The trick, of course, is finding out what the patient needs that they'd rather lean on besides their anxiety. I don't have an easy answer for you on this, other than to realize that it is a possibility and to listen for my patients to tell me what it is that they actually need. How does anyone decide that they're going to do something? Ask any high school student what they want to do, and if you're an adult, they'll give you an answer to brush you off, but inquire deeper, especially if you have a relationship infused with trust, and the answer will be, how am I supposed to know what to do with my life at the age of 18? That fertile, not sure, and in the process of requiry, that's not a bad stance. Peter Deadman, the guest of this episode, wasn't so sure what he wanted to do, and like so many, he took to the road. And it turns out that he had a bit of an entrepreneurial bent as well, which is a polite way of saying, like having a boss. That attitude, it has served him well, and it's been a benefit for our acupuncture and East Asian community as well. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Peter, and I think you will as well. Stay with us. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AcuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit acufastneedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Peter Deadman, welcome back to Qiological.
Great to be here. Thanks, Max.
Wonderful to have you. So today this is part of a history series. It's a look at the early days of our profession, kind of before there was a profession. There was a time that acupuncture and Chinese medicine, mostly in the Oriental community, something seemed to happen in the 60s and 70s. And you were part of that stream. I'd like to get a sense from you, just as a place to start. Where was it when you first heard about acupuncture? Where were you? And if you can, remember the time of year? Do you remember the weather? Do you remember what the newspaper headlines were like? Right? What were the issues of the day? What were the struggles that you were facing as a young man when you first heard acupuncture and it got your attention in a way that something shifted?
Memory is a funny thing, and I can't remember exactly the place, and I can't remember the weather, and I certainly can't remember what else was going on. But what I do remember is that I was, for a time, deeply into the macrobiotic diet as taught by George Osawa and Michio Kushi. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That is a Japanese-based natural foods diet that promised the ability to prevent disease and restore health. A kind of sensible diet, actually, very much based around whole grains and lots of vegetables and lots of pulses and not much animal food. Anyway, I had led a very dissolute life up to that time and was in the early stages of being a reformed character. I had set up a natural food business, initially a restaurant, then a shop, and was...
How old were you at this point?
I was 22, I think. Yeah, 22.
22.
Yep.
All right. You're kind of reforming your life and you're setting up a restaurant at age 22.
Yeah, well, I started really early. I started drugs and traveling and living on beaches from the age of about 16 or 17. So by the time I got to 21, I'd got all that done and I was really ready to start doing things in the world. And for me, the macrobiotic and natural food thing was the first thing I found that I felt passionate about. Up to then, it had been a whole list of things I knew I didn't want to do. For example, I got a place to go to one of the most prestigious colleges at Oxford University, and then I just decided that wasn't me. So there was a lot of no, and this was the big yes. And so within that macrobiotic community, because it came from Japan, there was quite a lot of shiatsu. So I was going to seminars and I was learning a little bit about meridians, channels, and some points in the shiatsu context. And that obviously naturally led to the realization that the other way of treating them was to stick needles in. So that was my first introduction to acupuncture. And then I actually had some acupuncture in my hometown from, I guess, a real pioneer that set me... I think I was seeing him and just constantly talking to him about what was going on. And he said, "Why don't you study it?" So I jumped ship. I left the natural food business. And well, actually, I stayed working in the natural food business right through college until I qualified. So I went to school in 1975 and I qualified in 1978.
So he said, "Why don't you go study it?" Did you give that some thought? Did you give yourself a little time, mull it over? Or was it one of these things where he said it and you're like, yep, that's what I'm going to do?
No, actually, I don't think it really registered at the time.
Mm.
I've had several periods in my life when I knew I didn't want to keep on doing what I was doing, but I didn't know what was going to come next. And they were kind of quite difficult periods. I felt kind of confused, uncertain, lost. I knew I didn't want to carry on running a business, a foods business, however idealistic it was, and it was very idealistic. It was also very hard work. So I was kind of swirling around in this mist of uncertainty. Oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then I do remember I woke up one morning and it was exactly like a light bulb going on in my head. And that was, oh, I'm going to study acupuncture. So I guess his words had sort of sat in there for a while underneath my conscious level.
I get it. I've spent much of my life not knowing what I wanted to do, but certainly knew what I didn't want to do. I knew what to avoid, didn't always know what to go to. And man, acupuncture, that just kind of sat in the back of my mind for years. And it wouldn't go away. Lots of other ideas would come up about things to do. But acupuncture was, it just didn't go away. It was quiet. It wasn't like you have to do this, but it was persistent.
Yep.
Funny how those things go. So where did you go to school? What did you learn? What did an acupuncture education look like in 1975 in Great Britain? Because I don't think we even had schools in 75 here in the United States. So you've got a slightly different history than we do.
Yeah. So actually, I was just in the States. I went to a Tai Chi and Qigong health in the community, whole body health research conference in Boston, and then went to Worcester and taught a half day at the New England School of Acupuncture. I'm pretty sure that was already going then.
So NISA was already up and running.
Yeah.
Okay.
So luckily there was a school fairly near me, an hour's drive away, which was great. So I went to that. You said, what was the education like? I mean, you're interested in the history, so I could give you a bit of background. As I understand it, I don't want to get anything wrong, and I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that 3 guys from the UK went together to Hong Kong for a very short period of time, I mean, really short period of time, and studied with a Vietnamese doctor called, I think it was Vietnamese, called Wellbeing. He wrote a book. There was an acupuncture book by Wellbeing. And they came back, and in the true spirit of Chinese medicine friendship, they all fell out with each other. And they went, and they went off and set up 3 separate schools. So one was a doctor, so he set up a medical, just the school just for doctors, people with medical education. There was J.R. Worsley, the inventor of the 5 Element School, who went off and set up his thing. And there was a osteopath called Dick Van Buren, who set up the school I went to.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now, how long was the training to become an acupuncturist back then? I mean, these days it's like 5 or 6 years.
No, it was 3 years part-time.
3 years part-time.
And the education was very, very mixed. So the one thing I'm really grateful to the school I went to for was it was very thorough in teaching the channels and points. No mucking around. You had to learn every single acupuncture point, and you had to learn, well, you learned the primary channels. Like a lot of schools, there wasn't much emphasis on secondary channels, but certainly the primary channels. That was great. The theory teaching was absolutely appalling. I mean, it was, I could, have to restrain restrain myself from conveying how difficult and how bad it was. And part of the problem, I think it was the same with all 3 schools, that was that, quite understandably, these 3 different guys just didn't know very much. Their training was, I was told 2 weeks, but it might have been more than that. So they really didn't know very much. Fair enough. But the words "I don't know" never, ever passed their lips. Mm. So there was a great deal of invention. So Worsley invented 5-element acupuncture, and Van Buren invented all kinds of things which changed from day to day, had no consistency, didn't really make sense.
Could it be that at that time he was working it out himself? He's trying to figure it out and teaching whatever seemed to make sense at the moment? Because, we go through this, we get a modicum of something, and then we figure out how things really work.
I think to do that, you have to be sincere, honest. You have to constantly self-evaluate. You have to be open to learning from your mistakes. That was not the psychology of, I can't speak for the others, that was not his psychology. He was revered. It was very mildly cultish. So it was one of those situations where, as far as a lot of the students were concerned, every word he said was pure gold, even if it completely contradicted what he said before. I, unfortunately or fortunately, was born with a rather powerful bullshit detector, and I just couldn't bear it, really. It was
it didn't fly with you. So how did you learn it? How did you manage to pull out what was nourishment and useful and let go of the stuff that was just made up or bullshit?
The first 2 years, I was learning the acupuncture points and channels, so I did respect that. The rest of it I despaired of. And in fact, at the beginning of my 3rd year, because the first lecture we received was from this guy, I actually got up and walked out and said to myself, I'm not going back. But actually I stayed, and 2 really important things for me happened. The first is that the theory part of the 3rd year was taught by Giovanni Machocha. And although he was a bit in the same situation as everybody, really, with limited Chinese medicine education, he read French texts and he read Italian texts, and particularly French. So the French obviously had a quite strong connection to acupuncture through the Vietnamese tradition, and particularly a guy called Chamfort, who wrote a textbook. And Giovanni was, he was thoughtful, he was studious, he was down to earth, and I actually began to relish learning from him. And the second thing that happened, which was even more influential for me, was that so Ted Kapchuk had come back from Macau, having studied Chinese medicine for 3 years in a Chinese medicine school. And he'd come back and he'd started lecturing in the States. And as is the way of things, some enterprising student printed out the entire notes of his lectures, and they started circulating through the Chinese medicine community. And for me, this was pure gold dust. For the first time, I had a sense that I was learning something sort of deep, rich, true, which held together, which made sense. We almost fell out about it, actually, because in my final year dissertation, I wrote my kind of interpretation based on his notes. I wrote a kind of quite long core theory of Chinese medicine, and then soon after he turned up in the UK and accused me of plagiarism.
Oh. Well, that's interesting. His note, it was like bootleg copies of his notes.
Yeah.
Is what kept you going.
Yeah.
And it had material that made sense to you. You could follow it.
Well, it had the basic Chinese medicine curriculum, the functions of the tongue fu, the functions of qi, blood, body fluids, the differentiation of patterns, diagnosis. I mean, what we now, unfortunately, I hate the term, I really do, but what people call TCM. I would call it Chinese medicine.
Tell me a little more about that. Chinese medicine, TCM, what's the distinction that you have in your mind? Sounds like it's a little different from what's in the common parlance.
So my take on it is that the Worsley's 5-element school was pretty strong in the UK. He was British. He was teaching, he had a college, and people loved what he was teaching because I know it's really popular and I know lots of people swear by it. To me, it was all a bit fanciful. That's my take on it. And that opinion hasn't changed over the last, whatever it is, 40 or 50 years. So, and they learnt no Chinese medicine. They didn't learn Zhang Fu functions. They didn't learn differentiation patterns. They didn't learn tongue diagnosis. They were forbidden at that time from reading any books that were not sanctioned by the 5-element school. It was, again, slightly cultish. So when the kind of Chinese medicine that was being taught in universities in China, and had been since roughly the 1950s, when that appeared, it had to be given a name different from 5 elements. So it was called traditional Chinese medicine. Maybe, I can't remember, maybe that's what the Chinese government named it as. But it was kind of identified as a school of Chinese medicine rather than just being Chinese medicine. And there was quite a lot of criticism of it. One criticism was that under the, strict hand of communism, a lot of the spiritual stuff had been stripped out of Chinese medicine. That's a big discussion. I think that's far too simplistic. And the other was that it was the herbalization of Chinese medicine, which had a little bit of truth to it. But certainly when I went to China in 1981, and the doctors I worked with were great. They were fantastic acupuncturists. They embraced wide and deep traditions. They were really focused on channels as well as Zhang Fu theory. Their techniques were fantastic. So another element, I have to say, I don't know if anybody else has picked up on this, I think there was a bit of anti-communism in it, in the criticism of so-called TCM, particularly from people who wanted... Sorry, I'm just carrying on. Do interrupt me if you want, but...
No, not at all. This is exactly, Peter, the kind of thing that I'm interested in. Because, look, in the early days, just learning this stuff was not so easy. And how do you even know that you're getting the right thing and not just something made up, right? You've got a rather discerning mind. You were able to filter out some bullshit, and then some, bootleg copies of notes found their way to you. That was damn nourishing. You could really dig into that. And it sounds like it helped you to learn the medicine. That's all well and good. People can write things in books. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I remember being in school, reading a book on acupuncture, a guy named Deadman, actually. And it's a great book. But there's a part of me that's thinking, all right, some guy wrote this in a book, and where did he get it? Well, someone else wrote it in a book. And does it really carry water? Well, you find that out in clinic, and it sounds like you went to China, and you realized, yeah, this is the stuff. I'm watching it unfold in front of me.
Yeah. So I'd been through 3 years of college. I'd worked in the college clinic for a couple of years under the guidance of this guy, Van Buren. I'd practiced for 2 years, so I had some acquaintance with acupuncture. I never really understood how powerful acupuncture was till I went to China and saw it practiced by these doctors there. I mean, it was a completely different animal. I just want to go back a bit to two things. I don't know if I can remember them both. Yeah, one is, so from right through 75 to 78, there were maybe 4 books on acupuncture in English. That was the sum total. And even, the first book published in English in China had absolutely no theory in it at all. It was just points, channels, and semi-empirical treatments. That was one thing. The other thing, just going back to something you said at the beginning, like, why did all this happen in the 60s or 70s? And certainly, and I'm sure it was the same in the States, it was a time in Western cultural life when people started looking to the East. I mean, they always had done. Going back to the 19th century, people had been fascinated by Eastern culture, but it was the kind of new, let's loosely call them the beats and the hippies, who were inspired by Eastern traditions. And that was, actually, China was less so than India. So people were going to India and they're coming back wearing bells and long floppy clothes and chanting bits of kind of, Om and being all spiritual. And some of us were more attracted to Japanese and Chinese culture, but it was a big thing. It was just the tide, the cultural tide of the time.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. That makes sense. That sounds right. I was pretty young in the 60s, but I remember looking at like the hippies and with a lot of admiration. It was like, wow, they're doing something really different. And I think that's also the first inklings I had that, wow, there are these places outside of the country where I live, and it's really different.
Yeah, and exciting.
Yes.
I didn't even know I mean, when I was 15, my brother and I used to go to this esoteric bookshop in London and pick up books on, mystical Tibetan monks and, all the weird stuff, and attempting to meditate, not really knowing what we're doing and not even knowing what we're looking for, but having the feeling.
You had some kind of impulse.
Yeah, there was something out there.
Yeah. I was just going through my bookshelf the other day. I just recently changed rooms from my office, and that means unloading the bookshelf and then reloading it, which means you get to touch each book twice and decide if you want to keep them or not. And sometimes you find a book you forgot you had. I've got an old copy, speaking of weird old books, I've got an old copy of The Secret of the Golden Flower.
Oh, yeah, Richard Rohr.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've been reading through it. It's as difficult to read now as it was when I picked it up over 30 years ago. I mean, I mean, I've got a little bit of background at this point in some of this stuff, and it's almost impenetrable for me.
Yeah, I think I had the same experience. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm not very esoteric. I'm rather down to earth.
Yeah. So speaking of down to earth, you go to China and you find out that acupuncture is amazingly more powerful than you'd suspected. What did you know? What did you see? What happened?
So just briefly about that trip, it was organized by Giovanni Machocha, and it was the first time that pre-existing acupuncturists went to study in China. So they'd had students coming, I think even then from African nations and so on, who were complete beginners. So we went as a group of qualified acupuncturists. So it was a big deal. We were on television, and they milked it, and we were looked after very well and assigned to very experienced doctors who didn't really know what they were in for, really. And it was after about 3 or 4 days that the doctor I worked with, Dr. Xiao, said, I don't understand. You know Chinese medicine theory. And he was clearly quite pleased, even impressed perhaps. But you don't know anything about needling. So needling in Britain, in the school I went to and in the 5 Element School, was a kind of a tiny thing, a small thing. Tiny needles, barely penetrating the skin, sometimes falling out during the treatment because they hadn't been put in very deeply. And when we were mystically told that the reason they fell out was that they'd done their work and the body didn't need them anymore.
Yes, I remember hearing that myself.
Bullshit detector.
Yeah, well, could have been user error on the part of the acupuncturist, right?
And suddenly I encountered what the thing that came to my mind was the old magic act where a guy puts somebody, usually a woman, in a box and then starts penetrating the whole box with swords. She's miraculously unhurt. I mean, this doctor was putting needles in so strong and so deep that I was really shocked initially. But I came to understand that, and also they talked a lot about, they didn't talk about the acupuncturist having qi. They never mentioned that. But they did talk about the acupuncturist having finger force. And so actually trained strong hands and strong fingers because the needling was understood to be a really physical act. It was a really strong physical intervention, so that acupuncture treatment wasn't like 99% theory with a little dab of acupuncture added at the end. The acupuncture was, really strong, and patients were habituated to it. So when we started needling patients, they used to complain they were, not strong enough. They're not getting qi. They were a tough lot, of course. Since 1981 China, life was still very, very tough. Physically, people were doing hard physical labor. There were no cars. People walked or cycled everywhere in the middle of winter. If they had to have teeth out, even certainly the poorest people had them out in the street without anaesthetic, sit on a chair and some guy would pull their teeth out with a pair of pliers. So the relationship to physical intensity, let's not say pain or discomfort, was much higher than a kind of pampered Western office worker. But I also understood, of course, that was the background to acupuncture throughout its history. We talk about, people, there are I can't knock them. I don't want to criticize them. There are very soft forms of acupuncture, very gentle forms, Japanese styles. But if you just do a little bit of logical thought, until the development of the modern acupuncture needle, needles were brutal things. They weren't super fine. They didn't have super fine points. They were thick. And in fact, so the needles used in the hospital I worked in were not disposable.
Of course not. In the 80s?
Yeah, they were autoclaved and used again and again and again and again. I did that when I came back to the UK, and then one day I bought a microscope and looked at the end of some of the needles I was using.
Oh.
And it was terrible.
I'll bet.
No wonder patients were yelling, which is what the needles were like in China. But that wasn't really what the impact was. The impact was getting really powerful chi sensation. And it was a matter of pride, slightly macho pride among some of the doctors, how powerful a chi sensation they could get, and particularly how far they could make it travel. So we had a demonstration from this one wonderfully dynamic guy he was famous for putting a needle in gallbladder 40 and making the chi sensation travel either down to the ankle or up to the side of the head.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the kind of milieu of acupuncture, but it would all have been a bit irrelevant if I hadn't seen such wonderful results.
Yeah, what kind of results did you see? What kind of things were treated that you didn't realize could be treated?
If you have chronic disease, clearly it takes time. However good your acupuncture is, it takes time. So, of course, we were treating people with strokes, we were treating people with asthma, treating people with epilepsy, and many of them were getting treated every day, 6 days a week. So their recovery was relatively faster. But the really dramatic demonstration was with acute disorders. So when people came in, for example, bent double with acute back sprain and walked out freely, or another example is an odd one. We had once maybe, we had a patient brought in suffering from what's called biliary ascariasis. So that's basically worms in the gallbladder, passed on from eating raw vegetables when they were working in the fields, because as long as we know, certainly 2,000 to 3,000 years, the main fertilizer was human manure.
Yep, human waste.
Human waste, so the bugs got past. And they'd get into the gallbladder, and then for some reason they'd emigrate out the gallbladder into the bile duct. And it was almost identical to the pain of gallstones. And people have said that's one of the 2 or 3 most painful conditions the body can suffer. So I remember we had a guy brought in by his brother, carried on his back to the 2nd floor of the hospital that had no elevator. He'd been awake for 36 hours, groaning in agony. He was brought in almost screaming in agony. And the acupuncture needles went in, and in 30 seconds he was asleep. Bang. It was those kind of acute sprains, and also acute appendicitis. So the hospital I was in specialized in treating acute appendicitis with acupuncture. So those kind of acute emergency situations, that's where I saw how powerful it could be.
Kind of these days, when I was there, and that was the early 2000s, there was this common thing that I would hear, not just from the people, but also from the doctors, which worried me, actually. They'd say things, it's a very common phrase. Well, Western medicine for acute issues and Chinese medicine for chronic. That's the way it works. But clearly, we know that acupuncture can do wonders in an acute situation.
Were they acupuncturists or were they herbalists?
That's a good question. I was mostly studying herbal medicine. So perhaps that's why those herbal doctors said that. And then there's just this common idea, within, the Lao Bai Xing, just the, regular people, that something is chronic, use Chinese medicine. Something is acute, first go to Western medicine. But no, the only acupuncturist I really spent time with there was Dr. Wang Jui. Honestly, I had a very different experience. When I was in China and observing some of the acupuncture clinics, partly because I think the needling was so strong, or they were putting them like way deep into the abdomen, I thought to myself, I am not going to be able to practice like this where I live. This is not going to be helpful to me as a practitioner. And I think probably to my detriment, I gave it a pass instead of going into it, figuring it out, and then figuring out how I might be able to modify it. So that was a missed opportunity on my part.
Yeah, I came back from China and I was interviewed for the local newspaper because it was really unusual. It was very unusual for anybody to go to China, let alone go to China and study acupuncture. So they gave me a 2-page spread in the local newspaper, and I was instantly overwhelmed with patients.
Yeah, but that was great for business, huh?
I mean, I set up a multi-bed, 3 beds, 3 curtain beds, a bit like mimicking what it was like in the Chinese hospital. I had a nurse assistant, and I was treating, maybe 80 patients a week. So the fact that I lost a percentage of patients from doing Chinese style needling didn't sort of have such a big impact on me at first, because there were plenty more where they came from. Before I kind of, got a bit smarter and wiser and realized that I had to adapt my treatment. But that didn't mean that I completely changed. I just adapted to what patients could tolerate. And some very emotionally sensitive and vulnerable patients, I had to treat in a very, very soft way. But others, I could, once I explained it, it's a bit like, I think there's a parallel with herbal medicine. If you give decoctions, full strength, high dose decoctions to people, and you introduce the subject to them by saying something like, well, these might taste pretty foul and you might find it really difficult to take, and you sort of, talk them into the idea that they're not going to be able to tolerate them, and they come back, they go, no, I couldn't drink it. Whereas if you are very matter-of-fact about it and just assume they're going to drink them, then compliance is much, much higher. So I think how we present it also makes a difference.
Yeah, there's that, of course, how you set it up and kind of invite people into the experience. I tended to go on that side of, these things are nasty. In fact, you might not even be able to drink it. I would actually exaggerate how awful it was. And on occasion, they come in and go, yeah, you were right. That stuff's pretty nasty. But they drink it. And then other people come in and go, well, actually, it's not so bad. I'd be like, okay, great.
Maybe you triggered their kind of, I'm going to show him.
Yeah, exactly. I'll show him.
It doesn't, whatever works, whatever gets them to drink it. There are obviously more than one approach. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think actually sort of, two things. I think intolerance to strong needle is in itself a diagnostic sign. I crudely, when I used to teach, I say it's the difference between you put a needle in and suddenly on one person and they go, oh, that's really strong down my leg. And you put a needle suddenly in another person and it threatens the very citadel of their being. It overwhelms their Shen because they don't have Shen resilience. So people who are physically strong and perhaps doing manual labor, farmers and builders and so on, generally speaking, will have the ability to go, yeah, that's really, I can really, really feel that, but it's in my leg. It's not threatening my very existence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a kind of crude diagnostic sign, I'd say. And also, I don't know about you. I mean, if I get massage, if I get tuina, I want it to be powerful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not interested in going and being gently rubbed or oiled or perfumed or, you know, if I've got stagnation and pain in my muscles, I'm happy to have somebody take me to the point of screaming, you know, which some of the most effective tuina I've had has been like that. Really very difficult to tolerate, but very effective. So I guess different types. We're different types.
Sure. There's that. I suspect there's something about the mind of the acupuncturist and how we are with doing the needling that also makes a difference. You know, I mean, I know that there's a line in the Ling Shu about grasping the needle like you grasp the tiger or the tail of a tiger or something like that. I don't have it memorized. I'm terrible with stuff like that. But I've found for myself that if I'm okay with needling in a strong way, if I'm okay, if I'm settled and I'm good with it, the patient's going to be a lot better. I recently learned a system called Sa'am, and it uses a lot of Jing-Well points. And when I first started to learn it, I looked at all those Jing-Well points and I thought, oh man, I don't know, I might have to give this a pass. That's a lot of damn Jing-Well points. And then the next thought that came into my mind was, Michael Max, shut the hell up. You're an acupuncturist. You're an acupuncturist, and if you're worth your salt, you'll be able to needle those points. So you better figure that out. So I talk to myself all the time when I'm practicing like that. And what I came to find was if I was okay with needling a Jing-Well point, it went a whole lot better for the patient. It really makes a difference where our mind and our spirit and our Shen and our intention, not intention of what's going to happen for the patient, but our intention of how I'm going to use this needle makes a huge difference.
Two things come to mind about that. The first is that it could be argued that medicine is nasty, you know, and somewhere along the line you have to pay the price for medicine with a bit of suffering. So what we've done with Western medicine has made delivery of pharmaceutical medicine very easy. You just pop a pill. The nastiness might come later with side effects. The nastiness of acupuncture, if you probably will hurt patients if you do acupuncture. The nastiness is up front. You know, there's no price to pay down the line. So, you know, whatever it is, surgery, internal medicine, foul herbal brews, somewhere on the line it's going to be unpleasant. But it's not hidden unpleasant. It's really up front. That's one thing. The other thing I want to say is completely different. So I think any thoughtful person looking at the world of acupuncture cannot help but be struck by the fact that there are hundreds of acupuncturists and hundreds of teachers out there doing hundreds of different things. You know, in the end, not much in common. You even have non-needling forms of acupuncture. So every single part of the delivery, how the points are chosen, how the needle, how many needles used, depth of needle, retention of needle, this system, that system, it's overwhelming if you try and be objective about it. But they all have one thing in common, which is that everybody does them, says, well, they work. Okay, so then we have to start thinking what is actually working here. And there's the famous research on psychotherapy. They wanted to find out which kind of psychotherapy was most effective. And the conclusion after the study was it wasn't really anything to do with the style of psychotherapy. It was the therapeutic relationship. So I've been very interested in the effect of the practitioner on the patient. And that is potentially an extremely powerful thing. Is it okay just talk about it for a minute?
Absolutely.
So, when I've been writing a book about Qigong, and previously I wrote a book about Yang Chinese lifestyle, and that kind of reacquainted me with the autonomic nervous system. And a lot of people who are suffering, people suffering anxiety, people suffering pain, people suffering chronic disease, are to varying degrees locked into sympathetic dominance. They're at a state of they're not really able to enter that truly deep parasympathetic rest, relax, healing, repair state. And one thing acupuncture does on a very crude level, when you stick needles in, I think, is it shifts people into parasympathetic states. So we all know it's so common. People go, oh, I don't know what you did to me, but I was so sleepy after the treatment and I went home, I had to go to bed. It's quite a familiar thing. But even more so, and even more important and more powerful, is that when we, the practitioner, are in genuine parasympathetic state, I mean, we're centered, we're calm, we're open, we listen, we're friendly, we're not faking it. Faking is not so effective. You can put on that caring voice, but if it's not really real, it doesn't work so well.
Yeah, there's no such thing as fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Right? There's only doing it and figuring out how to do it. Yeah.
So the very moment the patient encounters, it could even be a phone call, the first phone call or the first visit, who we are and how we are transmits an invitation to them to let go of some of this chronic sympathetic activation. And for some people, we may be the only person in their life that offers that invitation. I mean, if they've got a stressful work situation with domineering bosses or unpleasant work colleagues, or they've got domestic stress and strife or whatever, then, and particularly if they're really troubled people, they may have nobody they encounter that can transmit these messages, these very subtle messages that human beings are actually quite good at picking up, that they're safe. You're in a safe situation. You can trust this person. They've got no hidden agenda. And that is really, in itself, really healing. And that, I think, is sort of one of the things we offer, and one of the things that sort of can help make sense of all these different styles of acupuncture that all work.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner. Because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital qi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
So it's not what we do, it's who and how we are in the presence of the patient.
That second one is terribly important, which is why I think that one of the special things about Chinese medicine, which can feel like a burden or it can feel like an inspiration, is the kind of message taught in the Neijing, Yellow Emperor's Classic, and also embodied by doctors such as Sun Tzu Miao, that a doctor is a cultivated person. And when I say cultivated, I don't mean they go to the opera, although they might. I mean a self-cultivated person. And the power that has, the healing power that has. The sage, what the Neijing calls the sage doctor. So not a addicted, chain-smoking, suicidal general practitioner.
Well, maybe for certain people, there'd be a resonance, and it's a place to start. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. I give a lot of thought myself these days especially because there's increasingly all this really interesting research and these ideas about the polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve, and it's like, wow, that's cool stuff. Can't say I understand. I understand that as much as I understand quantum physics, meaning very little, but enough to go, wow.
Yeah.
I think there's something here. And one of the things that I've noticed in my clinic, this happens all the time. You've probably noticed it too. People listening, I think you've noticed it. Put a needle or two in, and all of a sudden the stomach starts to rumble, right? You start to get that glue, 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 as they say in Chinese, and the intestines, they start working again. The peristalsis kicks in. Why is that peristalsis kicking in again? Because they're coming out of fight and flight. And they're coming into that parasympathetic. Digestion is the first thing that will start to come back online.
Yeah.
And people are always embarrassed about it. Oh my God, I'm sorry, my stomach, I ate. I don't know why it's gurgling. It's like, yeah, it's okay. Don't worry. You're actually just relaxing. It's just fine. Sometimes when you're just taking a pulse, it'll do it. It's like, okay, game on. It's a really helpful indication.
Yeah, and that's even when we're taking the pulse where, gentle touch, caring touch, that's already helping to shift people.
Sure, and attentiveness.
Attentiveness and listening.
Yeah, for sure. There's I've said this on the podcast before, but I'm going to say it again because it's just one of my favorite things. There's this book I read about this master guitar maker. It could take him 10 years to make a guitar because he makes it in his own damn time. Thank you very much. But he's like genius guitar maker. And the guy who wrote the book is interviewing this other guitar maker talking about this guy. And he's asking this guitar maker, so like, what's the most important thing that goes into the making of a guitar? And the guy says, well, there's about 600 different things that you have to do. But the most important thing is the state of the mind of the guitar maker as they're making the guitar.
Yeah.
I think that's true for the work we do as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you haven't always been just a curious and maybe troublesome student of acupuncture. You've also contributed to the profession in all kinds of ways. You fired up a magazine. When did you fire up the Journal of Chinese Medicine? What got you started with that?
I started just after I qualified. The years that I spent in the natural food business, where we had fundamentally no money, and whatever needed doing, we had to learn how to do ourselves. Oh, we need shells, all right, we'll have to learn how to build shells. We need whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Oh, we need accountancy. I have to learn how to do the books.
Well, it's kind of that. It's that good hippie. We can do it ourselves. DIY thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So after I qualified, I had very few.
Oh, hang on a second. When you say qualified, what does that mean?
That was the end of my 3 years at acupuncture school.
Okay, so you got your degree, and now you can
Yeah.
Do you have licensure, or do you just qualify and then you're good to go?
Fundamentally, you're good to go, and you still are.
Mm.
There's no control of acupuncture in the UK. Anybody can stick needles in. You can in the UK, you can legally perform brain surgery without any qualifications at all. You will, however, be prosecuted if you call yourself a brain surgeon and if you injure somebody, but you are allowed to do it. But I know.
Okay, kids, don't try this at home.
Yeah. So there I was with a lot of time on my hands and the familiarity with that I need to do something. And because I told you there are only like 5 books on acupuncture in English, I thought, we really need.
Yes, plus that bootleg copy of notes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We need a journal. So I started one and, I got my mates to write it. Giovanni Machocha wrote, and Julian Scott, who's still working specialist in pediatrics and eye diseases, and various people. And for a few years, it was really put together on a typewriter in my bedroom. With probably the first 8 or 9 years, we had maximum 200 subscribers. But I stuck with it. It's a bit like having a baby, You have to stick with it. It goes on year after year. And luckily, like a baby, it eventually grew. Mm. So I did that for 40-odd years. And that was really about the desire to make information available, education. You mentioned the acupuncture textbook, and quite rightly, this is what I see in this book. Who's saying, it's taken from what some old Chinese people said. But what I want to say about that is, with a young profession, and with what I experienced of people who were not well informed about the history of Chinese medicine and the history of practice, the great tendency to make things up, my fellow authors, particularly Mazin Al-Kafaji and myself, one of our aims was to say, well, look, this is the recorded tradition. It's not the last word, by any means, but this is where we start from. Mm-hmm. If we quote doctors going back nearly 2,000 years, not quite, talking about the acupuncture points and their indications and how they're used and so on. To us, this was treasure, deep treasure, mm-hmm. that we wanted to bring into the light.
In a sense, you were also like teaching yourself. You'd taken what you already had and you really went a lot deeper with it.
Absolutely. I mean, that really changed my practice. It changed how I used acupuncture, certainly. Slowly. One of the things is it's really hard to change one's point selection habit. You get into a habit, you get into a rut. So it took time, but it did change the way that I practiced. I don't practice anymore. And I think if I had my time over again, I would pay more attention to palpation-based practice, to the more physical end of diagnosis. And I'd learn.
What leads you to say that? What is it that you see now that you maybe didn't see back then?
That's a difficult question. So I mentioned Julian Scott. Do you know him? Are you familiar with him?
I do, yes. Yeah, he was in Seattle for a period of time I didn't study at the school he was at, but I knew of him.
Oh, okay. He said a few things, because he was a friend, still is, but that stuck in my mind. One of them, he said, in Western medicine, it's recognized that different types of people go into different branches of medicine. So, for example, the intellectuals, the smart people, go into general practice. The patient who comes in the door could have one of many, many hundreds of conditions, and you have to have at least some knowledge of nearly all of them. You have to study a lot, and you have to be thoughtful, and you have to think things through, and so on. The surgeons, so in Britain, it's kind of a stereotype, they're the rugby players. So I don't think you can create a parallel, but, they're the some kind of the American football, They're kind of like the stereotypical images. They're quite big and they're muscular, and they're not always the smartest light bulbs in the pack. And when they encounter a problem, pretty soon they start thinking, like, where can I cut?
Mm-hmm.
They don't really want to listen to the patient's lifestyle and how they feel about their mother and all that kind of thing. So he said, well, the same thing in Chinese medicine. The herbalists are the intellectuals, and at one end of the spectrum, and the very, very physical practitioners at the other end of twin or massage. So where do acupuncturists fall in that? And the feeling I've got is that their proper place is more towards the twin or physical end of the spectrum than the intellectual end of the spectrum, as far as treatment is concerned. This goes back to this quite physical treatment, but I would add in, I would have liked to have been better educated in musculoskeletal disorders and palpation and, body work, really, to complement, not to replace, to complement the other side of Chinese medicine, which is the one I love most, passionate about, is the use of the theories of Chinese medicine, and particularly differentiation of patterns, to quite deeply understand people in terms of their life.
Yes, not just their illness, but in terms of their life. It's, Peter, I hear you say that, and it just, it goes through me, because I find that if I can come up with a pattern, if I can discern, probably the best way to say is discern the pattern. If I can discern the pattern, then there's all kinds of other things I just might know about this person that lets me help them.
The first English language acupuncture textbook that even touched on theory, and in the discussion of differentiation of patterns, they said it points forwards to the treatment and backwards to the cause. Mm. And that's really what we're saying. I mean, more than the cause, but you see, I think, and I'm sure you do too, I think the way Chinese medicine, so-called TCM, which is often used as a disparaging term, the way that it's constructed is the most sophisticated form of medicine that human beings have come up with in any culture. But that is my take on it, because it embraces the threefold analysis, if you like, of a patient. Number one, what disease is it? Mm. So we used to hear endlessly people go, no, only Western medicine diagnoses diseases. Chinese medicine doesn't diagnose disease. That's completely wrong, totally wrong. All Chinese medicine doctors, properly trained, start by naming the disease, because that already tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about prognosis. It already indicates some aspects of the treatment you're going to give them. So that's level one of analysis. Level two of analysis is what's the underlying pattern, which then enriches your treatment, determines a lot of your treatment, helps you understand what the origin of the disease might be, how it can have come about. Heart yin-shu comes about for different reasons than liver qi stagnation, for example. And then it adds in, it addresses the unique presentation of the individual, not just the disease, not just the pattern. So 50 patients can come in with the same disease, 10 patients can share the same pattern, and then every single one of the 50 patients is unique and has got unique characteristics that need to be addressed in the analysis and the diagnosis and the treatment. I don't know any other medicine as smart as that. To do all that, you mean? Yeah.
If you like puzzles or if you're just interested in people, endless fascination using these lenses and ways of interacting with people. Endless. Yeah.
Just like a detective, really.
Oh, very much so. I always enjoyed the articles that Steve Clavey would write on occasion, the journals of Mallory Chan, was it, that he'd write in the Lantern? Did you read any of those? You familiar with those stories?
I did used to read the Lancet once in a while.
Yeah, no, he's written a number of detective stories. I mean, they're actual detective stories. and they're all about medicine. They're really well done. Yeah.
Did you ever come across John Shen, Dr. John Shen?
I have, but I haven't really studied his stuff.
Well, he was born in China. His family moved to Taiwan after the revolution. And then he ended his working life in New York, came to Britain in three times, giving workshops, seminars in the 1980s.
John Shen. Wait, you said John Shen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who worked with Dr. Hammer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not John Shen, the herbalist who wrote a herbal pharmacopoeia, different. He profoundly influenced my generation. So Giovanni Machacha, Julian Scott, myself, and lots of others, because he was just like out of the Chinese detective books. He was so jaw-droppingly brilliant it was like magic at knowing what had happened in somebody's life to cause this. I mean, I heard a story recently, very briefly, from another practitioner who observed him in New York, of this very, very wealthy French woman who came from France because she suffered from terrible, terrible headaches and had seen every specialist without help, and really a last resort flew to New York. So he just, he asked a few questions. She was the heiress of a very wealthy cosmetics company. And I can't remember the exact sequence of events, but he asked a couple of questions. And one of them he asked about her makeup. And did he see, looked under the eyelid, took her pulse, like 2 minutes. And then he started asking her how her visit to New York was going. Have you seen the Empire State Building? What are you doing here? And she got quite ratty about it. She said, I've come all this way to see you, to be helped, and now you're asking me what tourist site. He says, "It's all right, madam, you're cured already." So what it turned out was that the cosmetic company had developed a 24-hour mascara, which she wore. And he realized it was unusual because when he rubbed his finger across her eyelid, there was no black on it. Didn't come off in his finger. And he had asked her, he said, "How long have you been wearing that mascara?" And she said, 2.5 years, which was the period she'd had the headaches. So he instantly discerned that she was allergic to this mascara. And as soon as she stopped wearing it, it would get better, which it did. So, that was, he did that all the time. It was inspiring, but it was also depressing because none of us felt we could aspire to that level of acute detectivism, you know.
Yes, well, and some of it is how do you even frame yourself and what it is you do? For a long time, I framed myself as an acupuncturist. I remember being in acupuncture school, and I'm here to be an acupuncturist. And they taught us gua sha. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, this grandma folk thing. I ignored it when I was in acupuncture school. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Well, years later, I find out it's really useful. But I'm thinking I'm an acupuncturist. I'm here to learn how to use needles. I could see in a situation like that, someone coming in like her, and I'm thinking, where am I going to put a needle? My job is to put a needle in somewhere. But no, my job is to use these skills to help her in the way that's going to be helpful for her. Maybe that's using a needle. Maybe it's doing something different.
Maybe it's using your brain.
Maybe it's using your brain. That's a great cautionary tale, Peter. Thank you. That's a great story.
Well, his constant message was, when encountering a patient, the first question you ask is why. Why? Why is this person reached this point in their life that they need help? What's going on? Yeah.
That's helpful. So you've been here in this profession kind of from the beginning. You've contributed to the profession. There's a lot, I think a lot of us are grateful to you for helping us to learn, whether it's the books or the journals. I think you have an app these days. We'll talk about that in a moment. Just as a way of winding this down rather than looking back. And I understand that you're retired from acupuncture at this point. But as you look forward into the future ways, what do you see as the opportunities for our profession? You saw certain opportunities when you were a young man. It drew you into it. What are the opportunities that you see for us, or maybe the challenges that you see for us over the next journey of the way down the road of being acupuncturist here in the West?
Yeah, well, so my journey, which began with the dietary thing, that we can look after ourselves and improve our health through our dietary behavior, brought me around full circle. One of the reasons I stopped practicing acupuncture is I wanted to move more into health education. And that led to me writing, I don't know if you've seen a book called Live Well, Live Long.
Yes. It's been out, 2 or 3 years now?
Oh, no, it's been out 7 or 8 years.
7 or 8 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, see, I'm getting old. My brain's not working so good.
That's sort of my best attempt to convey the wisdom of the Chinese nourishment of life tradition, which is basically how to live to be as well as possible and live as long as possible. And that is very much tied up with my passion for Qigong, and I'm just at the closing stages of finishing my book on Qigong. But going back to really what we were saying, which is the way the Chinese medicine is constructed, Chinese medicine is founded on the idea of prevention and lifestyle medicine. Just read the Yellow Emperor's Classic, the sage doctors didn't intervene after the disease had arisen. That's like trying to dig a well when you're already thirsty, or trying to forge weapons when the battle's raging around you. The diseases that afflict human beings now are chronic, non-infectious diseases: cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, strokes, depression. Most of them are incurable once they're developed. You're not going to cure serious cardiovascular disease. You're going to manage it. That's the case with most of them. And the problem is that they are, because of modern lifestyles, they are increasing exponentially all over the world. So the rates of all those chronic diseases are expected to double within the next 20 years. And health services at the moment can't really cope with the cost of managing them as they are. And, the resources become more and more unaffordable. So the future of medicine, ignoring all the high-tech biohacks, the true future of medicine is preventive medicine. It's logical. It has to be. It's the only solution. People have to live healthier lives. They have to eat better. They have to move better. They have to cultivate better mental and emotional states. And that is what we are we're the ninjas of. Because it's embodied in our medicine, we understand it. We really understand the effect of diet, the effect of lack of movement, and we understand the potentially positive interventions of those things. We understand really better, because of differentiation of patterns, better than anybody else, what this patient in front of me is going to most benefit from. So I would like to say one of the challenges and one of the opportunities of the Chinese medicine profession is to proudly take its place as leaders and educators of a healthy lifestyle. So why can't clinics be educational centres? Our clinic, I know it's a bit idealistic, but it's a vision. Our clinic doesn't only treat patients, it teaches them, has classes in mindfulness and Qigong and Tai Chi and dietary practice and all kinds of things. So we have the leaders in lifestyle medicine, and a particular passion of mine. Everybody in the world is called upon now to save the world, really. Our world is heading for destruction. Human life is heading for destruction, and animal and insect life is heading for destruction because of human behaviour. Climate change is the biggest threat to human health that there is. We had the news yesterday, 1 in 6 of all species, all animal and plant species, and animal species, is threatened with extinction now. So we're living through what, I have to say, without being too gloomy, could be the end days, for our civilization, certainly as we know it. But we can't afford to be hopeless. We have to look it square in the face, and we have to engage. And medicine has always been at the forefront of public health. It was doctors who discovered you need to drink clean water, for example. And because our medicine is so deeply rooted in the natural world, yin-yang, 5 phases, herbs, the view of the body as an ecosystem of flowing water, all these ways that we look at our medicine are rooted in the natural world. I feel our profession has an even greater obligation to stand up on behalf of nature and try and embody it in how we behave, the political parties that we vote for, the way we run our clinics, the way we run our conferences. There's opportunities really to model. I know I'm getting a bit carried away, but we need vision. We always need vision.
We do. That's true. And the way that our medicine is very much relational and nature-based, that gives us a lot to work with.
Yeah.
And these are times that ask for more than just a needle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
However wonderful it is.
However wonderful it is. You said you have a book coming out on Qigong?
Yeah.
When is that coming out? When will that?
Hopefully early next year, January maybe. It's all written now. Because I lay out and design my books myself, I self-publish, so I'm doing a lot of work now on the layout and design. But it's something I've been working very focused on for the last year and a half. And, I want it is, I hope, something that's not been done in quite the same way before, because again, like the Manual of Acupuncture and like Live Well, Live Long, certainly like Live Well, Live Long, it's deeply rooted in the Chinese tradition. So I've written to my best ability about some core ideas of Chinese philosophy and that underlie it, and the history of self-cultivation practices. But I've equally brought in research that illuminates and helps explain why we're doing these weird things. Why are we doing slow breathing? Why are we moving very slowly? Things that seem mysterious but actually have brilliant explanations.
Okay, so give us just a little glimpse into what is the power of slow?
Of slow?
Yeah, slow movement. What's the power of slow movement?
Well,
we're such a fast-paced world.
Yeah. Well, I suppose three things. One is calming the mind. It's badly needed nowadays. One is to integrate movement with slow breathing. So if you're going to do slow breathing and you want to seamlessly integrate movement, you have to do slow movement with it. And the third thing is that, as far as body work is concerned, the slower you move, the more time you have to be aware of what's actually going on in your body. And that applies to, that is incredibly valuable. So I think all sports people should do slow Qigong. I mean, if you're going to, what's your favorite sport? Are you into sport?
Is sailing.
Okay. I'm not sure if it applies to, well, it probably does. I mean,
you have to be mindful in your movement. A lot of balance is involved.
Yeah, or exactly. I was thinking, for example, if you serve a tennis ball, the movement and the power has to seamlessly flow through the connective tissue, the fascia, and the muscles from the feet right up to the hand. And the more seamlessly it flows in an uninterrupted way, without blockages and without misfiring, the easier and more effective and more powerful your serve will be. So anybody watching a professional tennis player has got that. But if you want to develop that skill faster and better, you just slow it right down. You become aware, actually, what is my foot doing?
Mm-hmm.
What is my ankle doing? Where is my knee in relation to my foot and my ankle?
Yeah, what's the tension? What's the tension in the calf of my leg, and how does that relate to my hip?
Exactly.
And how does that change the power in my arm?
Where is the unnecessary tension? So this training of slow movement, we're actually training the mind, we're training the breath, and we're doing really quite high-level body work, body cultivation.
That all sounds about right to me. I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Good. I'll send you a copy.
That'd be wonderful. And if people want to or you have like a mailing list or something people could get on so they find out when it is published, or?
Well, you asked me to put some contacts on your website.
Yeah, for the show notes page.
But if people are particularly interested in that book, there's a very simple website that takes you straight to a rather crudely designed page, but at the moment, it's got the contents and it's got some sample pages, and it's simply www.qigong.works.
Love it. That's great. Well, Peter Deadman, is always a delight to talk with you, and thank you for this glimpse at the old days and how they're informing the new days, and a really personal walk through medicine that you've had. It's been a real delight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I take my hat off to anybody listens the full hour and a half, but
I think you might be surprised. I think people like the long conversations, actually.
Good.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Well, thank you, Max, so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Peter's comment about how 3 guys went to Hong Kong to learn some acupuncture and then came back and started 3 different schools. Emblematic, isn't it, of how in this trade we all have some fundamentals that we share. And at the same time, there are at times vociferous differences of opinion on what the proper practice of acupuncture actually is. It seems to be built into the DNA of our trade that we have competing schools of thoughts and some sharp-tongued opinions about colleagues on the other side of the track, so to speak. And yet, acupuncture, despite coming from a completely foreign way of thinking, has entangled itself into the mainstream cultures of the West. People like Peter, they used their own interest and curiosity in a way that helped those of us who came later to learn it. I often wonder what drives someone to move forward when you don't know which way forward might be. And that brings me back to something I said at the beginning of the show about asking an 18-year-old what they want to do with their life. They may not have a clear-cut answer, even if they brush you off with what seems like one, but what they do have is a sense of possibility and that they are made for something, even if they don't know what that something might be. That is the kind of chi worth cultivating our entire life long. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.